Presidents of War, the epic story from 1807 to modern times, historian Michael Beschloss gives readers an intimate and exhaustive look at American presidents who have taken our nation into deadly conflict. From Thomas Jefferson to George W. Bush, Beschloss shows how these often physically and emotionally overwhelmed leaders have struggled with Congress, the courts, the press, anti-war protesters, and even their own advisors as they make the most difficult decision to face any president, sending Americans to their death. The book is a chilling view of how far we've traveled from the time of the founders who tried to constrain presidential power to today, when the chief executive in the Oval Office has the potential to launch weapons that can destroy much of the human race. Michael Beschloss joins us now. Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Great to see you.
So, Michael, as I said in the introduction, the intent, or one of the key intents of the founders when they were drafting the Constitution, was to put constraints on the powers of the president, particularly the powers of waging a war. Yet, as we all know, that power over the last 200 years has increased dramatically. How did that happen?
Well, the founders basically said it's too much to have, the future of the American Republic depend on one person, whether we go to war or not. So that's why they gave war powers to Congress. And what the book is about is over 200 years that I've written, it's moved the other direction so that a modern president, as we know, if a president wants to wage war tonight, he can do it, and he can do it pretty much unchallenged. And the result is that the life or death of most of the human race, and this is not too much to say, depends on the character and the judgment of the person who happens to be president.
Give us some of those examples.
Well, for instance, in 1846, James Polk, not exactly a household name these days, but he basically fabricated an incident on the Mexican border so the Mexicans would attack, and Polk could say to Americans in Congress, "We've been attacked, we need a big war against Mexico." What he really wanted was he wanted to take about 1 million square miles that would make us a nation from coast to coast. Great idea, but you shouldn't start wars based on false pretexts. 1898, the Maine was sunk in Havana Harbor. William McKinley said, "We need a big war against Spain, to retaliate." Turns out the Spanish were not behind it. It was a boiler accident. Lyndon Johnson in the Gulf of Tonkin happens again and again. I'm all for always defending ourselves, always waging war. There's a threat to our security. What I'm really worried about is a president in modern times, and thank God it hasn't happened yet, but some president is going to say, George H.W. Bush, for instance, Persian Gulf War drove his numbers up to 90% popularity. Maybe I should do that too.
Why did this erosion continue to grow to the point where, as you say, basically somebody in the Oval Office can press the button?
That's it. And it happened mainly because Congress became lapdogs. And if you look at recent times, for instance, Lyndon Johnson was able to bully Democratic leaders in Congress to support his Vietnam War, which turned out to be a disaster. So all I'm saying is, Constitution says that presidents should come to Congress. The only people who can enforce that are members of Congress and maybe the Supreme Court.
By the way, something that I didn't know, I found out in your book, that disaster in Vietnam could have been a lot worse. Talk about that.
Well, right. That's something I found, some documents that show that in January of 1968, Lyndon Johnson was worried that he was going to lose the Vietnam War, so his commander in Vietnam, William Westmoreland, secretly says to him, "Well, I've got an idea. Let's move in nuclear weapons, not to use them tomorrow, but just in case we need to use these to, avert a defeat on the battlefield." And LBJ made terrible decisions in Vietnam, one of the great tragedies in American history. But in this case, secretly, and it's what I wrote about in the book, said to Westmoreland, "Shut this down immediately. I don't want any planning about nuclear weapons. I want you to put everything you've said about this in a safe. I don't want anyone to find out about this for 50 years or more, because it might lead some people to say Johnson should have used nuclear weapons. And if that happens, not only a tragedy in itself, but might bring in the Russians, might bring in the Chinese." So in this long war where Johnson and Nixon behaved so badly, maybe this was Johnson's good deed.
Just to stay in Vietnam for one more question. I think if I were to ask most Americans of a certain age, I guess, what the most unpopular war in our history was, they'd probably say Vietnam.
Right.
But
Wasn't Vietnam, it was the War of 1812. And that was the first major war that America fought, even though probably at least half of Americans were against it, and nearly half of the Congress was against the idea of a war against the British. James Madison demanded it, and the result was that this was not only probably the most unpopular war in American history, but probably, unlike what is thought about Vietnam, this was the first war we probably lost, because our war aims were conquering Canada and getting the British to stop harassing our ships. Neither of those two things really happened, but because of the heroism of Andrew Jackson and Don't Give Up the Ship and Star Spangled Banner, all these things we remember, people remember this as a great victory, but 1812 was really the first time we lost a war, not Vietnam.
was it unpopular from the beginning? Because most of our wars have started out as popular wars, right?
That's what makes it so odd, because 1812 was unpopular from the very beginning, and all I would say in our own time is that if, God forbid, we ever have to wage another major war, it has to be something that Americans understand at the outset and that we're united behind. That's what was the big problem with Vietnam, for instance. You know, in 1964, when LBJ began to escalate, Americans were saying, we barely heard of Vietnam. What are we doing there?
You know, in the book you include Thomas Jefferson, but he's the one rare example of a president who could have gone to war. There was a clamor for war, but he refused to join the frenzy. Explain what happened with him.
Jefferson was a brilliant leader in a lot of ways, not perfect, but in 1807 there was a British attack on an American ship. Americans were justifiably outraged, and they were saying, let's go to war against Britain immediately. And 9 out of 10 leaders even then would have said, well, this is terrible, we should go to war against Britain. They might have liked to be a war leader, would have made them more popular. You know, even Jefferson was attracted by that. But Jefferson, as a great leader, said, you know, the differences we have with the British are not large enough to really compel American sons and some daughters to die in a war, and so I'd like to stop it. What we've seen too rarely in the history of the presidency is a president saying, yes, there's a clamor for war, but I'm going to stand up to that and make sure that it doesn't happen.
In fact, has there been another example of that?
Actually, there have been a few examples. Dwight Eisenhower, in the mid-1950s, there was a clamor for war in Vietnam. And Eisenhower, to his great credit, said, I just don't think the stakes in Vietnam are so great that we should get involved. Plus, Korea, which we had just fought a couple years earlier, shows us that we should not get involved in a land war in Asia.
So, as you said, there were presidents who maneuvered the country into wars that were unnecessary. But there were also presidents who had to fight the war and were, as you so well depicted, emotionally and physically broken as a result of the stresses. Talk about some of those examples.
That's what most of this book is, because it's about these human beings behind the scenes, these presidents who wage major wars, and what I found is that a lot of them have pretty close to nervous breakdowns. Almost every single one of them has a physical breakdown under the pressures of war. Abraham Lincoln said to a friend, for instance, can you imagine that I, who can't even stand watching a chicken being slaughtered, I'm being surrounded by oceans of blood? Lincoln had a propensity for depression, and the war brought that out even more. So, you know, what allows them to go through this? One thing is that almost all of them had great marriages. Lyndon Johnson had Lady Bird, whom I got to know pretty well when I was doing historical research, and I think that if he did not have a wife who understood him as well as she did, Lyndon Johnson could not have really functioned. And another thing is most of them turned to religion. Lincoln was almost an atheist when he was a young man, and when he was president during the Civil War, one of his friends saw him and said, I'm so shocked to see you reading a Bible. And Lincoln said, I don't see how anyone could go under the pressures of war without something like religion to give him comfort. Lyndon Johnson was a Protestant, not a particularly committed person in terms of religion. Lady Bird Johnson told me at the end of her life, during the Vietnam War, at certain moments I thought that Lyndon was going to become a Catholic because He went with our Catholic daughter to Mass, and he found such comfort in that.
So I guess this is an easy one. The presidents who were the best war leaders in our history?
Hands down, Abraham Lincoln,
Yeah.
Franklin Roosevelt. They waged wars, Civil War, World War II. We wouldn't have the pleasure of being here today if it weren't for the fact that Lincoln and FDR were great war leaders. And not only war leaders in terms of telling the generals what to do, they operated on a moral plane. Lincoln said, we're not just waging the Civil War to reunite the South legalistically. This is a moral struggle against slavery. Franklin Roosevelt said, this is not just a balance of power against Hitler and the Japanese. This is a moral struggle for the four freedoms to make this a better world. That's when you really see war presidents at their best.
And our worst war presidents?
Probably a tie. I think Polk probably at the bottom of the scale because, you know, he left this diary, and I read his diary, and he says basically, I had a great day. I just cheated and lied to these members of Congress. And Lyndon Johnson, whom I love for civil rights, Medicare, other things, but you look at him as a war president, and basically almost 60,000 Americans died that did not need to. And, you know, having written about Johnson Vietnam, I run into family members who tell me that my son and some daughters died for a cause that was worth it, and I'm struggling.
What is the one message that you would like to convey in this book?
We Americans are living in danger, and the danger is that one person, one president can get the United States involved, potentially will be tempted to get involved in a major war. It may be necessary, but it also may be for political reasons, and that's exactly the opposite of the intention of the founders. But we've come to the point where the life or death of so many people around the world will depend on one person. The founders never felt that one president would have that kind of brilliance.
All right, Michael. The book is Presidents of War, the epic story from 1807 to modern times. It took 10 years to write, and it's well worth the read.
Thank you so much.
Mike.
Thank you so much, Ralph.